Hi, I'm David Meier, owner of Glenns Creek Distilling. Welcome to Glenns Creek, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history about the property here. This is the former Old Crow Distillery, originally built in 1878. The distillery is located back here. We currently operate in what was formerly a bottling building here. So we're going to take you through the entire process of how we make our products here, and we're going to show you all the steps from cooking and fermenting and distilling, and then we can talk about the barrel aging process. So again, welcome. Let's go inside and have a look. Turn on the agitator. First thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of enzyme. This is a liquefaction enzyme. If we didn't put that in there, we're going to put the corn and the rye in and the starch to make it very pasty, similar to cooking oatmeal or grits. So what we're going to do is have the water heated up to boiling, and this process, we're going to extract the starches from the grains. We're going to add the corn. This is rye. So, just a shout out to our friends up at Tractor Supply with our special corn that we get directly from Tractor Supply. Most of our recipes use 600 pounds. We have one recipe that's 100% corn, it uses 700 pounds. So the key thing is the total grains of water ratio. And that's typically around 33% grain to water. What you saw down there with the flame is we have direct heat on here. So it's really just like cooking at home on your stove. If you leave that on the stove without stirring it from time to time, you would burn your food. So we have the agitator here that's keeping this moving. And now I'm going to add the rye, and I usually do that before I finish the corn because, as you can see, the rye is a little bit more powdery, so it doesn't want to sink and mix in completely. So I usually add a little corn on top of it. And we get our rye and our barley from Brooks Grain over in Louisville. So great supplier for us. You can see the rye. You can see the rye that kind of clumps up, and so I'm going to have to stir that a little bit at the end to get it all mixed in. Got to stir that rye in a little bit, otherwise it will just stay caked up on the top. So the first thing I'm going to do is add setback to this. Setback is the liquid that we reserved from the still after the finish of the distillation run. It has a very low pH, and what that's going to do is that's going to lower the pH overall of the cooking water and give yeast a conducive environment. I have a mark here. I'm going to run it up to 30 gallons. So the water in Kentucky, due to the limestone, has a basic pH about 7.8. That means the still's ready to so we get that up to the level, and then we're going to switch it. So one of the things that's really important in this process is the enzymes that we use to break down the starches into fermentable sugars. They are temperature sensitive, and it's hard to see, but I have a line right there showing where we would like to be, and we're currently higher than that. So we're going to have to wait a little bit to add the barley into this until the temperature drops down a little bit. So this is the cafe au lait, and you can see just how dark it is. And we explained to folks that no matter what color it goes into the still, it's going to come out of the still clear. So while it has a very dark color right now, that has nothing to do with the finished product. It's always going to come out clear. Okay, so I'm just going to pour that in, and then I'll repeat the same thing for the next toad over there. And we keep track. When we're cooking, we have the basic recipe here, and we have which steps in the process have been completed. That way there's no confusion between us in terms of what has occurred. So I'm going to mark that I've added 4 scoops of yeast to that, and so we'll all know that the yeast has already been added. People have done it essentially for a long, long time before they understood really what yeast was. So that's pretty much it. We had the 4 scoops. Take a look at it a few hours from now, we'll probably notice quite a bit more activity as that yeast starts to do its job. So let's do a little recap of what we've seen so far. The first step we do is we cook the corn and the rye, and we're extracting the starch from the grains, and then we allow it to cool down until we can add the enzyme. And when we put the enzyme in there, that converts the starches into fermentable sugars. And then we allow that to cool down again to the temperature where we can add the yeast. So then begins fermentation. And fermentation is really kind of an important step. That's where the conversion of fermentable sugars into alcohol, ethanol, is done. And there's also a lot of other things that are happening here. One of those is a bacterial fermentation. A bacteria named Acetobacter consumes ethanol that's produced by the yeast and creates acetic acid, which is vinegar. And that is the part that makes sour mash sour. And as you probably know, acetic acid vinegar is an effective preservative. And so by the addition of acetic acid in this mixture, we don't get contamination from other bacterias and molds and things that would also want to eat the sugars and not give us ethanol. So this process generally takes 5 to 7 days. Sometimes it's a little faster, sometimes it's a little slower. It depends a little bit on the recipe that we're using, because when we change the proportions of grains, we get a different amount of fermentable sugars. And as we saw in the pitching of the yeast, it's not a very scientific method. We're not putting a known quantity of yeast cells in this mixture. So we do get some variation in time in that process. What we'll see is that when all the bubbling activity is completed and the grain that's on the surface here sinks to the bottom, that's the indication that the fermentation is finished. Now, we can measure that, and we do from time to time, but it can be easily done visually. It's a pretty clear process. You'll see some active bubbling fermentations, and then we'll show you one that's complete, and you can see the difference. Okay, I'd like to explain the distillation process for you. What we use here at Glenns Creek is pot stills. It's pretty old technology. It's been used for about 2,000 years or so, and it's fairly basic. This is the still. It's not running today, so I can touch it. It's not hot. But we put the fermented liquid in the still, and we fill it approximately to here, leave a little head space, and then we heat it from the bottom. We have direct heat on the still, and so we can't put any grains or anything in the still, only the liquid. Then what happens as the still heats up, the vapor starts to climb up through the column here and comes over here into this tank, which is known as a doubler. And what happens there is the vapor turns back into a liquid and condenses back to a liquid. Eventually this reheats and the vapors come out here again, and then they pass into the second tank, which is also another doubler. So effectively what we have is a triple distillation. We get the first distillation here, then it's recondensed and revaporized here, and then it's condensed and revaporized here. So after the second doubler heats up, the vapor is going to come up here. It's going to go all the way up, and it's going to go into that pipe over there. That's a condenser. There's a copper coil inside and a water jacket on the exterior. So one of the concepts of distillation, what we're trying to do is we're trying to separate water from the alcohol, or alcohol from the water, if you will. And as the vapor climbs up each one of these pipes, some of it's condensing and dropping back down and staying behind, and some of the vapors are going forward into the next step. And distillation, the way we do it, is basically a process of separating the various chemicals based on their vapor temperatures. We have 4 different stills, and each still has a different capacity, but none of the stills has enough capacity to fill an entire barrel. So let's say, for example, we're running 2 stills today and 3 stills tomorrow. That would typically be enough to fill a barrel. So it takes about 2 to 3 days, depending on what's happened in the fermentation process and how many stills we have operating on any given day. Once we've collected the distillate from the collection tank, it's time to put it in a barrel. Normally, we can roll the barrel directly over to the collection tank and empty directly into a barrel. But when a barrel's almost full, it's a little bit safer, less spillage potential, just to do it manually. So I'm going to demonstrate how we do that manually, and I'm checking the level in there, and we're putting that in the barrel. So we want to leave a little headspace in the barrel so that some expansion can occur. If we don't leave headspace, once the temperature warms up, the barrels tend to leak a little bit, and so a little bit of headspace. Also, that prevents us from overflowing the barrel and wasting some of the distillate, which is a capital offense in the distillery. So that's that.